Welcome to Capitol Dateline Online. I'm here with the executive editor of the News Service of Florida, Jim Saunders. So Jim, we've gotten through the first couple of weeks of legislative session fairly harmoniously, things passing. And now we're coming up to the big thing they have to do, the only thing they have to do, which is getting a budget together.
Yeah, it's this time of year when they really start to, or this time of session when they really start to put together the budgets and committees, and then it moves forward, through the course of the rest of the session. The legislature got some bad news last week, in that state economists revised estimates of state revenues downward by roughly $400 million, which will give them less money to play with during this budget process. And it's already raising a lot of questions about the Governor Scott has priorities of tax cut package. He wants about $1 billion in tax cuts. Also, he wants $250 million for economic development incentives. I think those were already in question about whether he could get that much from the legislature. But this revision downward in the tax revenue estimate is going to make it harder. It's going to make it harder for the legislature to come up with a budget. I saw a newsletter from Senator Don Gates, who's the Education Appropriations Chairman, who's already warning or talking about the fact that some of the education spending they had been talking about may have to be trimmed back because of this forecast. So it makes the whole process more complicated. And the Senate has been very skeptical of some of the governor's proposals on tax cuts and economic development incentives anyway. And so I think this is gonna make that discussion a little bit harder going forward this week, as well as over the next several weeks. I mean, the only thing they have to pass before July 1st, really, is a budget.
Right.
And they do have more money than they did last year and more money than the year before, so you got to keep that in perspective. But it's how much more money, and also there are long-term implications. If you make tax cuts, it does have long-term implications as well. It's not just a one-year hit. So that's all coming into play now.
Okay. We've also seen a new topic come up at the legislature this year, and that is the regulation of Uber and Lyft and those kinds of companies. What's going on there?
Well, this issue actually has been around for a couple of years, but it's sort of coming to a head right now. Uber, Lyft, these transportation services that are based on apps, there is a pretty heavy debate both on the state level and at local level about whether there should be regulation and how much regulation there should be. The House is pushing a proposal that would essentially put the regulation of the industry at the state level. It would prevent all kinds of local regulations, cities, counties, of these transportation services. The Uber, Lyft industry and so on likes that. They don't want to have to go fight it out with each local government about what the regulations are. And it looks like it's going to pass the House relatively quickly, possibly this week. Another sign of support in the House is that the House Speaker, Steve Christofouli, even brought up the whole regulation issue during his opening day speech of the legislative session, which indicates to me that it's a priority for him to move forward with this. The supporters of this approach say this is new technology, we need to foster it and move forward. But there's also another side of this debate. For one thing, local governments don't want the power to regulate taken away from them. Right. They argue it's a local control issue. The state shouldn't tell them, set all the regulations for the entire state. The local government should have retained control. The other issue, which may be even more difficult to deal with on this debate, is the taxi cab industry. They are typically or often heavily regulated at a local level. They pay fees to local governments and so on. And they are afraid that, or they argue that, these new technologies are going to come in, not be regulated, and then that's going to be an unfair playing field. So there's a lot of issues there. The Senate has not really given any indication that they're willing to go with this House proposal on putting the regulation at the state level. The Senate has taken an approach that they want to deal with insurance issues related to these transportation services. putting minimum insurance requirements on the drivers. There's all sorts of iterations of that issue as well. And that, what's the insurance when you have a passenger in your car versus when you're driving to pick up a passenger and so on. And there's elements of that in the House bill as well, but the House bill is far broader than the Senate. So it's unclear at this point whether they'll be able to reach an agreement during this session, but it definitely looks like an issue that the House is focused on. The other thing is these services are growing very rapidly. People are using them, and it's a fast-growing industry, which puts some pressure to do something one way or another on that issue.
And there's Representative Rich Workman, who actually is an occasional driver for Uber.
Well, that's drawn a lot of attention as well.
Yeah.
Rich Workman, who's the House Rules Chairman, and he's a lieutenant of the House Speaker, actually drives Uber on the side, supposedly. So that's drawn a lot of attention as well.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. For more news in public affairs and government in Florida, keep visiting CapitolDatelineOnline.com.